Some fences are built to mark property lines. Mine was built to survive a war. The crash hit my house hard enough to rattle the dishes in the kitchen cabinets. For half a second, I thought a pickup truck had slammed into the garage. Then came the sound that really woke me up. Metal screaming against metal. Deep, violent, mechanical. The kind of sound you feel in your teeth before your brain catches up. I rolled out of bed, boots hitting cold hardwood, and the motion lights outside exploded across the backyard in sharp, white beams. Through the bedroom window, I could already see steam drifting through the early morning fog. My coffee maker was still hissing in the kitchen when I stepped onto the porch and saw Veronica Hale's white Escalade buried nose first into my new fence. The SUV sat crooked at a 45-degree angle, front tires spinning uselessly in the mud while the engine whined like it was begging for mercy. Thick gray steam curled from under the hood into the freezing November air. Veronica stood beside the driver's door in silk pajamas and a cream-colored coat thrown over her shoulders, screaming loud enough to wake every house on Willow Creek Drive. "You psycho! You trapped your fence." Her voice bounced off the steel panels and echoed through the cul-de-sac. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there holding my black coffee, feeling the cold morning wind cut through my flannel jacket while the smell of burnt coolant and wet concrete drifted across the yard. The fence hadn't moved an inch. 6-foot steel walls reinforced with concrete-filled posts sunk 8 feet into Texas clay. Pipeline-grade steel, 1/4-inch thick. The same material I spent 15 years welding together out in Midland oil country where fences had to survive cattle, tornadoes, and 80-mile-per-hour winds. Veronica's Escalade never stood a chance. But here's the part that makes this story beautiful. 3 months earlier, that same woman laughed while smashing through my old cedar fence with this exact SUV. Not once, not twice, 3 separate times. Every single incident came with some excuse about tight turning radius or community visibility concerns. Funny how her visibility problems only existed around my property. The first fence mattered to me. I built it with my wife Claire 6 months before cancer took her away. Every cedar board was hand-stained in my garage, while country music played through an old Milwaukee radio, covered in sawdust. My daughter Lily carved little height marks into the inside posts every birthday growing up. That fence wasn't lumber. It was memory. Veronica knew that. People like her always know exactly where to push, because hurting people quietly is their favorite hobby. Willow Creek Estates looked peaceful from the outside. Fresh-cut grass, stone mailboxes, American flags hanging from front porches. But Veronica ruled this neighborhood like a suburban dictator wrapped in designer perfume and HOA bylaws. White Cadillac Escalade. Perfect blonde hair. Smile sharp enough to peel paint. She measured grass with an actual ruler and handed out violation notices like parking tickets at a football game. And for some reason, she hated me the second I moved in. Maybe it was the welding truck parked in my driveway. Maybe it was the grease under my fingernails. Or maybe she just couldn't stand the idea of a blue-collar widower living in a neighborhood she treated like her private country club. The Escalade hissed louder as fluid dripped onto my driveway. Veronica pointed at the steel wall with shaking hands. "You can't build something like this in a residential neighborhood." I finally took a sip of coffee and looked at the deep dent folded into the front of her luxury SUV. Then I glanced back at my fence standing perfectly straight in the floodlights. "County approved every inch," I said calmly. Turns out steel doesn't break like cedar. That's when the sheriff's deputy pulled into the cul-de-sac, lights flashing across the wet pavement, and everything started getting worse for Veronica Hale. Deputy Collins stepped out of his patrol SUV, pulling his winter jacket tighter against the wind, while red and blue lights washed across the steel fence like police tape at a crime scene. The cold air smelled like antifreeze, wet dirt, and overheated brakes. Veronica immediately switched from furious suburban queen to full victim mode the second she saw the badge. "Officer, this man installed a dangerous barrier designed to damage vehicles," she snapped, pointing at me with perfectly manicured nails shaking from either rage or embarrassment. "This thing is completely illegal. He booby-trapped his property." Collins looked at the fence. Then he looked at the Escalade folded around it like aluminum foil. Then he looked at me standing there calm with a coffee mug in one hand. I could already tell he knew exactly what kind of call this was. "Sir," he asked me quietly, "did you install this fence yourself?" "Every weld," I answered. He walked closer, flashlight beam gliding across the thick steel posts anchored into concrete footings wider than fence law even required. Collins crouched near the base and knocked his knuckles against the metal. The dull sound echoed through the morning silence. This is commercial grade. Pipeline surplus, I said. County permit is filed under retaining wall reinforcement. Veronica made a sound like a tea kettle about to explode. Retaining wall? This looks like a prison compound. Collins ignored her and kept examining the structure. I could hear Lily moving around inside the house behind me. She was probably peeking through the blinds upstairs. Poor kid had been waking up to the sound of Veronica's SUV for months now. The first time that Escalade tore through our cedar fence, Lily thought somebody had crashed into the house. I still remember her standing barefoot in the hallway, clutching a blanket, while rain blew through the broken fence panels outside. Veronica called it an accident back then, claimed the morning sun got in her eyes. The second time, she blamed slippery pavement even though it had not rained in 2 weeks. By the third impact, she stopped pretending. She just rolled down her window afterward and smiled at me while her engine idled in the driveway. Maybe if your fence did not stick out so far, this would stop happening, she said. That smile stayed with me longer than the tire marks did. Collins finally stood up and dusted dirt off his gloves. Ma'am, he said carefully, there is nothing illegal about reinforcing a private residential fence as long as it meets county code. Veronica's face tightened instantly. So you are saying I am at fault? The deputy glanced at the fresh gouges carved into the mud where her SUV had left the road entirely before slamming into my property. I am saying your vehicle crossed 12 feet onto his land before impact. Silence hit hard after that. Even the Escalade engine had gone quiet. Somewhere down the street, a sprinkler system hissed alive in the darkness. Veronica folded her arms tightly. This entire neighborhood knows he is trying to intimidate people, she said. Steel walls lower property values. I almost laughed hearing that because 3 months earlier she fined me $400 for unsafe deteriorating fencing conditions after her own vehicle destroyed the cedar panels Claire and I built together. Funny how the rules always changed depending on who was standing in front of her. Collins must have noticed the expression on my face because he turned toward me again. You got documentation on the previous incidents? I nodded slowly. 3 police reports. For security cameras, tire tracks, repair invoices, every single thing. Veronica's confidence cracked for the first time that morning. Just a little. Barely visible unless you were looking for it. But I saw it. Because people like Veronica always think working men stay quiet because they are weak. They never realize we are usually just paying attention. By sunrise, half the neighborhood was standing outside in slippers pretending to collect newspapers while staring at Veronica's ruined Escalade jammed against my fence. The cold morning air carried the smell of burnt rubber and expensive engine fluid all the way down Willow Creek Drive. People whispered in little clusters beside perfectly trimmed hedges, coffee mugs steaming in their hands like they had just shown up for front row seats at the best show this neighborhood had seen in years. Veronica hated that more than the crash itself. Not the damage. Not the tow truck. The humiliation. Because people like Veronica survive on appearances the same way trucks run on gasoline. And for the first time since she crowned herself queen of this subdivision, she looked weak. The tow operator arrived around 7:30 with a diesel rollback that rattled windows as it backed into my driveway. Chains clanked against steel ramps while hydraulic fluid hissed through the cold air. The driver took one long look at the Escalade buried into the fence and actually laughed under his breath. Lady must have been flying, he muttered. Veronica snapped around so fast her sunglasses nearly fell off. I was avoiding a hazard. The tow guy glanced at my perfectly straight steel wall and raised an eyebrow. Looks like the hazard one. I had to turn away to hide my grin. Deputy Collins stayed another 20 minutes documenting the scene, while Veronica paced circles near the curb making phone calls to somebody she kept calling the board attorney. Every few seconds, she would glare at me like this entire disaster somehow happened to her instead of because of her. Lily finally came downstairs wearing my old flannel jacket over pajamas, blonde hair still messy from sleep. She stood quietly beside me on the porch staring at the destroyed SUV. Did she really hit it again? She asked softly. I nodded once. Lily looked at the steel fence stretching across the property line, morning frost glistening along the dark metal panels. Good, she whispered. That single word hit me harder than the crash earlier. Because Lily used to love this neighborhood. Back when Claire was alive, this street actually felt peaceful. Summer cookouts, Christmas lights, neighbors waving from driveways. Then Veronica took over the HOA 2 years ago, and everything changed slowly like rust spreading under paint. Suddenly, every house had violation notices taped to doors, lawn measurements, approved flower colors, parking restrictions. She turned Willow Creek into a competition nobody agreed to enter. And somehow my family became her favorite target. Probably because I stopped pretending to care what she thought. The first time she came after me directly was 6 months after Claire passed. I was still leaving work boots by the garage door because I could not bring myself to move anything she touched. Veronica showed up one afternoon wearing white capri pants and carrying a clipboard like it was a badge. The smell of her sharp floral perfume reached me before she even spoke. "Mr. Cole," she said with that fake sympathy voice rich people use when they want credit for basic human decency. "Several residents are concerned your property is beginning to look neglected." Neglected? That word stayed in my head for weeks. Not grieving, not healing. Neglected. Like my wife died and somehow inconvenienced the neighborhood aesthetic. I remember tightening my grip around the wrench in my hand, so hard my knuckles hurt. But I stayed calm because Lily was inside doing homework at the kitchen table. Veronica kept talking while smiling politely. "We all have hardships, Ethan. Community standards still matter." Community standards. Funny phrase coming from a woman whose luxury SUV had smashed through my fence 4 times. The rollback winch suddenly roared to life, dragging the Escalade backward inch by inch with a loud metallic groan. The entire front bumper peeled loose and dropped onto the pavement with a heavy crunch. Several neighbors flinched. Veronica looked like somebody slapped her in public. And standing there watching that 6,000-pound SUV struggle against steel, I realized something important. Bullies only look powerful until something finally refuses to move. The HOA violation notice hit my mailbox before the tow truck even cleared the subdivision entrance. That told me everything I needed to know. Veronica was already trying to turn herself into the victim before the dust settled. I stood in my garage that afternoon holding the bright yellow paper while the smell of welding oil and cold steel hung in the air around me. Lily sat at the workbench behind me finishing homework with headphones on, but I could tell she was listening. Kids always hear more than adults think. The violation letter accused me of installing an aggressive visual barrier inconsistent with community harmony. Community harmony. That phrase almost made me laugh out loud. Veronica had driven a 7,000-pound luxury SUV into my property before sunrise, and somehow the fence was the problem. According to the letter, I had 72 hours to remove the steel wall or face daily fines starting at $500 per day. $500. The paper even smelled expensive, thick cardstock with embossed HOA lettering like they were mailing wedding invitations instead of extortion threats. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and slid it into the same black binder where I kept every document connected to Veronica Hale. Security screenshots, repair invoices, sheriff reports, audio recordings, tire measurements. For months ago, that binder barely existed. Now it was thick enough to stop a door from closing. Lily pulled one earbud aside and looked up at me. "You are not taking the fence down, right?" The fluorescent lights above the garage buzzed softly while cold rain tapped against the metal roof outside. I looked past her toward the steel wall standing solid beyond the open garage door. "No," I said quietly. "Not this time." Her shoulders relaxed immediately. That bothered me more than the violation notice did. A 16-year-old girl should not feel safer because her father built industrial barriers around the house. But Willow Creek stopped feeling like a neighborhood a long time ago. It felt more like territory. And Veronica protected her territory the same way some people guard bank vaults. Through intimidation. Through paperwork. Through fear. Around 6 that evening, my security cameras picked up headlights slowing outside the property. A black Mercedes sedan rolled past the house once. Then again. Tinted windows. Smooth idle. Expensive car. The third pass confirmed it was intentional. I stepped onto the porch and felt damp, cold air settle into my jacket while rainwater dripped from the gutters in steady metallic taps. The Mercedes stopped beside the curb. A man stepped out holding an umbrella and a leather document case. Mid-50s. Gray hair cut too perfectly. Shoes too polished for a rainy Texas driveway. "Mr. Cole," he asked. "Name is Richard Barlow. I represent the Willow Creek Homeowners Association." Of course he did. The man smiled politely, but his eyes stayed flat and cold. I had seen that look before from corporate inspectors on pipeline jobs. Men paid to sound reasonable while delivering threats. Mrs. Hale believes tensions in the community have escalated unnecessarily, he said. We would like to resolve this privately. Rain hissed softly against the umbrella between us. Funny, I answered. Private resolution never seemed important when my fence kept getting destroyed. His smile tightened slightly. Veronica maintains those incidents were accidental. I looked directly at him. For times, silence. Somewhere down the street, thunder rolled low across the sky. Barlow opened the document case and handed me another packet. This one thicker. Legal language. HOA bylaws. Fine schedules. Threats disguised as procedures. If the structure remains, he said carefully, the association may pursue civil action for property devaluation and hostile architectural modification. There it was. The real message underneath all the polished words. Submit or we bury you in legal fees. I took the packet without even glancing at it. Then I noticed something interesting. Tiny mud streaks across the lawyer's expensive pant legs. Fresh mud. The same reddish clay sitting around the damaged section of my fence where Veronica crashed that morning. He had already been over there inspecting the scene personally before coming to intimidate me. That meant panic. Real panic. And people only panic when they realize control is slipping away. The rain kept falling most of the night, turning Willow Creek Drive into a ribbon of black pavement reflecting porch lights and Christmas decorations like blurry oil paintings. I barely slept. Not because of the lawyer. Men like Richard Barlow never bothered me much. I spent too many years on pipeline crews dealing with executives in polished boots pretending they understood hard work. No, what kept me awake was the feeling that something underneath this whole mess still did not add up. Veronica was arrogant, controlling, vindictive, but she was not reckless. People like her only push as far as they think they can win, which meant somewhere along the line, somebody convinced her she was untouchable. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and walked into the garage. The cold concrete floor pressed through my socks while the smell of machine oil and steel dust settled around me like familiar company. I switched on the hanging work light above the bench, and the entire garage glowed amber against rows of welding tools and neatly stacked metal stock. Claire used to joke that I kept this place cleaner than our kitchen. Maybe she was right. I opened the black binder again and spread everything across the workbench. Sheriff reports, HOA notices, insurance claims, security timestamps. At first glance, it looked like ordinary neighborhood harassment. But the more I studied it, the more patterns started jumping out at me. Every violation notice arrived immediately after one of Veronica's so-called accidents. Every complaint against me got processed within hours while complaints filed by other residents disappeared completely. I knew because neighbors started quietly talking to me after the third fence incident. Mrs. Delaney across the street told me Veronica ignored repeated reports about street flooding near the elementary school bus stop. Another neighbor got fined $700 for leaving a fishing boat in his own driveway during a family funeral. But somehow Veronica's own violations never existed on paper. Convenient. The rain hammered harder against the garage roof while I flipped through documents under the buzzing work light. Then I saw it. Same signature. Same approval stamp. Same handwriting pattern on nearly every enforcement letter connected to Veronica. Not just signed by her. Approved by her personally. Which should not have been possible according to HOA bylaws. I reached for the community handbook and flipped straight to enforcement procedures. Sure enough, violation disputes required board review from at least 3 elected members before fines could escalate. Veronica had been issuing penalties alone for months. Maybe years. The metallic taste of adrenaline crept into my mouth. Suddenly, this was not just about fences anymore. This woman had been running the HOA like her own private kingdom. I grabbed my laptop and started digging deeper into county records while rainwater dripped steadily outside. Property liens. HOA financial disclosures. Meeting minutes. The deeper I looked, the uglier it got. Missing documentation. Duplicate contractor invoices. Landscaping payments to companies connected to Veronica's real estate business. Thousands of dollars moving around with almost no oversight. Then I found something that made me sit back in complete silence. 3 months before my first fence was destroyed, Veronica proposed a community beautification expansion during a closed HOA meeting. Included in the attached map was a future widened turning lane directly cutting into the corner of my property. My fence sat exactly where her expansion project needed space. I stared at the screen while the garage suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. None of those crashes had been accidents. Not one. She had been trying to force me into removing the fence voluntarily so the HOA could claim safety concerns and expand the roadway. Slowly, quietly, piece by piece. The whole thing was planned. I leaned back in the chair listening to rainwater hiss through the gutters, while welding sparks from earlier still lingered faintly in the air like burnt electricity. Claire used to say there were two kinds of people in this world. People who build things, and people who take things from builders. Veronica Hale had spent years taking. But now I finally understood something important. She did not hit my fence because she lost control of her vehicle. She hit it because she thought eventually I would lose control of myself. The next morning smelled like wet cedar, cold metal, and fresh coffee. Texas storms always leave the air feeling scrubbed raw, like the whole world got pressure washed overnight. I stood in the driveway staring at the steel fence while dawn sunlight crawled slowly across the black panels. Not a scratch on it. Veronica's Escalade caused more damage to itself than the wall ever took. That thought stayed with me while I drove Lily to school. She sat quietly in the passenger seat scrolling her phone while windshield wipers pushed away leftover drizzle and steady squeaks. Halfway there, she finally looked over at me. "You are not scared of her anymore, are you?" Kids ask questions adults spend years avoiding. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel for a second. "I do not think I ever was," I answered honestly. "I was just tired." Lily nodded slowly like she understood more than I wanted her to. The moment I got back home, I started making calls. Not angry calls. Careful ones. Quiet ones. Men in my line of work learn something important fast. Loud people lose leverage. Calm people collect it. By 10:30, my garage looked more like an investigation office than a welding shop. County property maps spread across the workbench beside stacks of HOA records and contractor invoices. The smell of printer ink mixed with machine grease while old blues music crackled softly through the radio Claire bought me years ago. Then came the first real break. A county clerk named Denise returned my records request faster than expected. "Off the record," she said carefully over the phone. "You are not the first resident asking questions about Willow Creek finances." Her keyboard clacked in the background while papers shuffled somewhere near her desk. "You ever hear of Hale Property Solutions?" The name hit me immediately because I saw it buried in the landscaping invoices from the night before. "Yeah," I answered slowly. "Why?" Silence hung for a second. "Because that company received nearly $80,000 in HOA contracts over the last 18 months. I leaned against the workbench staring at the steel fence outside through the garage opening while cold wind drifted in carrying the smell of rain-soaked dirt. "And," Denise lowered her voice, "and the company mailing address matches Veronica Hale's real estate office." There it was. Not arrogance. Not obsession. Money. The road expansion project was never about community safety or curb appeal. Veronica wanted property modifications approved through HOA funds so her private company could profit from the contracts. And my fence sat directly in the way of her little suburban cash machine. Suddenly, every crash made perfect sense. Every violation. Every pressure tactic. Every fake concern about visibility and safety. She had been trying to force me out quietly before the project reached county review. My phone buzzed again before I could even process the anger building in my chest. Unknown number. I answered carefully. "Mr. Cole," a nervous male voice asked. "My name is Kevin Mercer. I live 3 streets over." I recognized the name immediately from HOA meeting minutes. "Former board treasurer. Resigned 6 months ago. I heard about the accident yesterday," he continued quietly. "Look, there are things you should probably see." 30 minutes later, Kevin sat inside my garage, twisting a baseball cap nervously between both hands while welding sparks from my grinder still scented the air faintly. He looked exhausted. Pale. The kind of man who spent too long staying quiet about something eating him alive. "Veronica controls everything," he said. "Board votes. Violations. Contractor approvals. People stop fighting because she threatens lawsuits every time somebody questions her." He slid a flash drive across the workbench toward me. "Those are backup financial files from before I resigned." I stared at the tiny black drive sitting beside my welding gloves. "Why give this to me?" Kevin laughed once without humor. Because you were the first person she could not bully into backing down. Outside, the steel fence stood silent beneath gray Texas skies while water dripped steadily from the gutters. Strong. Immovable. Suddenly, I realized the wall was doing exactly what I built it to do. Not keeping people out. Forcing the truth into the open. The flash drive sat on my workbench for almost an hour before I plugged it in. Not because I was nervous. Because I already knew whatever was inside would change this from a neighborhood dispute into something far uglier. Outside, cold wind rattled dead oak leaves across the driveway, while the steel fence cast long shadows through the garage. The same fence Veronica swore was destroying community harmony. Funny thing about harmony. People only notice silence after somebody stops controlling the noise. My laptop screen glowed blue against the dim garage, while files loaded one after another. Budget spreadsheets. Internal emails. HOA reimbursement logs. At first it looked like ordinary accounting garbage. Numbers. Vendor codes. Landscaping expenses. Then the patterns started showing up again. Hale Property Solutions billed the HOA for nearly every so-called beautification project in Willow Creek. Decorative lighting. Sidewalk repairs. Traffic studies. Security consultations. Every invoice connected back to Veronica somehow. The smell of burnt coffee drifted from the old mug beside my keyboard while I scrolled deeper into the files. Then I found the meeting recordings. Audio archives from closed HOA board sessions Kevin secretly copied before resigning. I clicked one at random. Veronica's voice filled the garage instantly, smooth and confident like somebody who spent years practicing fake professionalism in mirrors. Mr. Cole's property corner creates visual narrowing concerns, she said calmly. If we continue documenting roadway safety incidents, we can justify forced setback modifications through county mediation. My jaw tightened immediately. Roadway safety incidents. That was her phrase for smashing through my fence with an Escalade. Another board member sounded uncertain. But there have only been 2 incidents. Veronica laughed softly. Then perhaps there will need to be more. Silence swallowed the garage after that recording ended. Even the wind outside seemed quieter. I sat there staring at the laptop screen while cold anger settled into my chest like wet concrete hardening. Claire used to tell me anger was dangerous when it moved too fast. Slow anger builds foundations, she said once while we poured footings for the old cedar fence years ago. At the time, I thought she was talking about construction. Turns out she was talking about people. My phone buzzed suddenly against the workbench. Deputy Collins. Mr. Cole, he said carefully after I answered. You home? I looked through the garage opening toward the driveway. A sheriff cruiser rolled slowly toward the house beneath gray afternoon skies. Yeah, I answered. Everything all right. Collins stepped out carrying a thin evidence folder under one arm. His expression told me this was no social visit. Got toxicology back from the accident scene, he said quietly once we stood beside the steel fence. Cold wind pushed across the neighborhood carrying the distant smell of chimney smoke and fresh-cut grass. Veronica had prescription sedatives in her system during the crash. I stared at him silently. Collins continued carefully. Normally that stays between us and the driver. But considering the prior incidents, he stopped and looked directly at the tire scars still visible in the mud near my property line. This is starting to look intentional. Starting. That word almost irritated me. But I stayed calm because law enforcement moves slower than welding steel. Both require precision or things collapse. I invited Collins into the garage and handed him headphones connected to my laptop. 15 minutes later, he pulled them off slowly while staring at the paused HOA recording on screen. Jesus, he muttered under his breath. The fluorescent lights hummed above us while rain clouds gathered again outside. Collins rubbed one hand across his jaw and looked toward the steel wall, standing silent beyond the open garage door. She actually planned this. Looks that way, I answered. He exhaled heavily. Mr. Cole, do not discuss this with anyone else yet. That sentence told me everything. Because deputies do not say things like that unless bigger people are about to get involved. Collins gathered copies of the recordings and financial files while I watched rain begin tapping softly against the steel fence again. Before leaving, he stopped beside his cruiser and looked back toward the house. You know what bothers me most? He asked. What? He nodded toward the wall. She spent months trying to tear this thing down. Red and blue reflections flashed briefly across the wet pavement as he opened the cruiser door. Turns out it might be the strongest thing in this entire neighborhood. 3 sheriff vehicles rolled into Willow Creek Estates the following Thursday, just after sunrise. No sirens. No dramatic lights. Just quiet engines crawling through perfectly landscaped streets, while automatic sprinklers clicked across emerald green lawns like nothing was wrong. But people noticed. Curtains shifted. Garage doors paused halfway open. Coffee cups froze in midair behind kitchen windows. Because deep down, everybody in this neighborhood knew something rotten had been sitting underneath the polished sidewalks for years. The cold morning air smelled like wet mulch and diesel exhaust as I stood in my driveway watching deputies walk directly toward Veronica's house, carrying file boxes and evidence bags. The same woman who spent 2 years patrolling mailbox colors now stood barefoot on her stone front porch wearing sunglasses and a white sweater, trying desperately to look composed while investigators moved in and out of her front door. Her smile was gone. That fake calm suburban royalty act she perfected over years had finally cracked. Deputy Collins stepped out beside me holding a paper cup of gas station coffee. County Fraud Division got involved yesterday afternoon, he said quietly. Turns out your HOA records opened a few bigger doors. Bigger doors. That phrase carried weight. Collins looked exhausted, like he had not slept much either. How bad? I asked. He stared toward Veronica's house, while movers hauled stacks of financial records into an unmarked county van. Bad enough the board attorney hired his own lawyer this morning. I let that sink in slowly while cold wind rattled the steel fence behind us. Across the street, Mrs. Delaney pretended to trim roses while openly staring at the investigation. 2 teenagers rode bicycles slowly past the scene, pretending not to look. The whole neighborhood felt tense in that strange, quiet way storms feel before tornado sirens start screaming. Then came the moment I will probably remember for the rest of my life. Veronica spotted me standing beside Collins and started marching across the street toward my driveway. Fast, angry, determined. Her boots struck pavement sharply while deputies behind her shouted for her to slow down. This is your fault, she snapped the second she reached the curb. Her voice sounded different now. Not powerful. Desperate. You think you won because you built some ridiculous wall? I stayed calm. The smell of fresh-cut grass drifted through the air while sunlight reflected off the black steel panels behind me. No, I answered quietly. I think you lost because you kept crashing into things that would not move. Her face tightened instantly. For a second I thought she might scream again. Instead she laughed once. Short. Bitter. You blue-collar people always think you are victims. Collins stepped forward slightly beside me. Mrs. Hale, he warned carefully. But Veronica kept going, years of bottled-up arrogance spilling out in broad daylight. This neighborhood was becoming premium property before he moved in with his welding junkyard and ugly fences. There it was. The truth. Not safety concerns. Not community standards. Contempt. Pure contempt for anybody who did not fit the country club fantasy she tried building with HOA money. I looked at her standing there in expensive sunglasses beside sheriff investigators carrying evidence boxes out of her own house, and suddenly realized something strange. She honestly believed she was the good guy. People like Veronica always do. They rewrite reality until control feels like virtue. Collins finally stepped between us. Mrs. Hale, you need to return to your property. She glared at me one last time before turning away. But as she walked back across the street, one heel caught the cracked edge of the curb, and she stumbled awkwardly for half a second. Tiny moment, barely noticeable, but symbolic somehow, because powerful people never think they can fall until gravity finally reminds them. Around noon, county workers arrived at the subdivision entrance carrying orange notices and temporary barricades. HOA operations officially suspended pending financial investigation. Residents gathered in small clusters reading the paperwork taped across the community bulletin board while whispers spread like electricity through the neighborhood. And standing there beneath gray Texas skies listening to people finally speak openly after years of silence, I realized the steel fence had done more than stop and escalate. It stopped fear. Winter settled over Willow Creek slowly after the investigation started. The neighborhood felt different now. Quieter. Real. Like somebody finally turned off a machine that had been humming in the background for years. No more violation notices taped to doors at sunrise. No more fake warnings about mailbox colors or grass height. For the first time since Claire passed away, I could drink coffee on my porch without feeling watched. Cold December air carried the smell of chimney smoke and cedar firewood through the subdivision, while Christmas lights flickered softly along rooftops. The steel fence stood dark and solid beneath a thin layer of frost every morning, unchanged by rain, wind, or gossip. County investigators spent weeks pulling records from the HOA office. Turns out Kevin's flash drive was only the beginning. Fraud charges, misuse of community funds, unapproved contractor payments, quiet little crimes hidden beneath landscaping committees and neighborhood improvement projects. Veronica resigned before formal hearings even finished. The board attorney disappeared right behind her. Hill Property Solutions shut down within a month. Funny how fast people abandon sinking ships once the cameras show up. I saw Veronica one last time in late January. No Escalade. No designer sunglasses. Just an older silver sedan parked outside the county courthouse, while freezing rain tapped against the windows. I had gone downtown to file final paperwork dismissing the ridiculous HOA fine still technically attached to my property. She stood near the entrance holding a cardboard file box against her chest, while wind whipped loose strands of blonde hair across her face. For a second, neither of us said anything. The courthouse smelled like wet coats and old paper. She looked tired, smaller somehow, like all that power she carried around for years had weighed more than she realized once it disappeared. "You happy now?" she finally asked quietly. Not angry this time, just empty. I thought about that for a moment while people moved around us carrying umbrellas and legal folders through metal detectors. "Honestly," I answered, "I just wanted you to stop crashing into my life." Her eyes dropped toward the floor after that. No comeback. No speech about standards or property values. Just silence. Because deep down, I think she finally understood what the fence was really about. It was never revenge. It was a boundary. A line saying enough. Spring came early that year. Lily painted small flower boxes along the inside of the steel wall while I welded decorative cedar panels across portions facing the street to soften the industrial look. Funny enough, neighbors started asking who built it. Then they started reinforcing their own fences too. Not with steel necessarily, but with cameras, documentation, questions at HOA meetings. People stopped being afraid to speak. Mrs. Delaney even ran for interim board president and won by nearly unanimous vote. The first thing she did was cancel all outstanding violation fines older than 6 months. Watching residents applaud inside the clubhouse that evening felt stranger than any welding spark or sheriff siren from the past few months. Hope always sounds quieter than fear. One Saturday afternoon, Lily climbed onto the porch railing holding a small paintbrush between her fingers. "Close your eyes," she said. I did. A few minutes later, she told me to look. Across the center section of the steel fence, painted carefully in white lettering against the black metal, were 6 simple words. Private property. Respect goes both ways. Sunlight hit the steel just right while warm wind rustled oak trees overhead, and somewhere down the block kids laughed beside bicycle tires humming across pavement. I stared at those words for a long moment, feeling the same deep calm I used to feel building things with Claire years ago. Strong things. Honest things. The kind that survive storms because they were never built for appearances in the first place. People think strength is loud. It is not. Real strength is quiet. It is patient. It stands there taking hit after hit until the people throwing themselves against it finally break first.